On this Veterans Day, Mr. President, I would especially like to single out a great veteran who has also served with honor and respect in this body, Senator Johnny Isakson.
Johnny Isakson is the chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, and a happy Veterans Day. You're also a veteran, so thank you for your service. What was that service precisely?
Georgia Air National Guard, 1966 to 1972.
And I'd like for every member of VSO or the VSO representatives in the audience to please stand. The Veterans of Foreign Wars. Okay. I want you all to understand something. You're the reason we're here. We're not the reason you're here. You're the reason we're here, to make sure we get the VA working as well as we can, as efficient as we can, and we thank you for your service to the country.
Politics is a business where a lot of talking is done. To walk the talk, to have actions back up what you are saying is truly exemplary. And you're not around Senator Isakson for very long before you come to the conclusion this gentleman is indeed the real deal.
He has been the best damn advocate for veterans in this country that they could ever ask for.
It's not about him, it's about a result that's good for veterans.
He has a bond with people who are willing to give their lives, the last full measure of devotion for their country. He believes that he has a responsibility to ensure that they get everything they deserve, and they deserve so much. So he has been one of their key champions.
Johnny Isakson was almost taken from another era, out of the pages of a history book, in terms of his sense of the importance of what we do to the United States.
A lot of times, you know you got a problem, and you can talk about the problem all day long, but that's all you do. You never do anything. So we decided, we set out at the outset to really try and perfect the VA legislation that had passed over the years to get rid of some of the problems that we had. And we did it, and we made the whole committee a committee of the whole in doing it.
One would think veterans would pull us together, and they do, but there's still issues that are contentious, not always partisan, but just difference of opinion and different states, different geography.
He went from John Tester, who's a fairly conservative Democrat, to Bernie Sanders, who is not the most conservative Democrat out there. So he had a lot of work to do.
I chaired the Senate Armed Services Committee. He chaired the Veterans Committee. Very closely united. When one is up, the other's up, and one's down, the other's down. So we were going through a rebuilding that no one thought we'd ever have to do, and we did that together.
The most important thing to happen to the Veterans Administration was to have Johnny Isakson, a former chief executive himself, somebody who understood how to hire, how to manage, how to terminate when appropriate, and how to reform major institutions. He brought that intelligence from the private sector and his 40-year knowledge of how bureaucracies work and, more importantly, don't work. And you combine that with his ability to work on both sides of the aisle. But for Johnny Isakson, we would not have had the first in a generation reform of the Veterans Administration that we've had over the last couple of years.
I mean, there's no question that without him, there is no fundamental reform of VA. He saw what was happening in 2014 and 2015 and 2016. He knew that there had to be change from the bottom up. And he shepherded legislation that I've said was the most far-reaching legislation to hit this department since the GI Bill was signed by Franklin Roosevelt in June of 1944. His business acumen, combined with his knowledge of how to get things done in this environment, has been absolutely vital. We have accomplished a lot under Johnny's chairmanship. From the Mission Act to the Forever GI Bill to the Appeals Modernization, and yes, to the Blue Water Navy Veterans Act. We had an incredible year last year, passing bills that everybody, when we tick them up, they say, oh, you guys can't do that, it's too controversial. Those were not easy bills, and we could have given up at any moment in time on it. And if I'd have given up on it, or he'd have given up on it, it would have severely reduced the chances of getting those bills passed. But Johnny kept pushing forward, and Johnny kept letting me know that we weren't going to stop until we got this done.
If you leave people out who are affected by the decision, you're never going to solve the problem.
I also have to recognize some of the people that have worked so hard to make all of this happen. And Johnny Isakson, you're here. Where's Johnny? Boy, has Johnny been working?
Johnny Isakson does not care who gets the credit for what's getting done, and he doesn't want the credit. And he believes that because he's all about results. He's all about getting things done, and that's why he's been able to be so successful as a chairman.
You talk about a chairman, Johnny was the ultimate when it came to being a bipartisan chairman. He worked with people on both sides of the aisle. He wanted to hear the entire story. He was always fair to every single witness.
He lets everybody talk as long as they want to talk. He always has something kind to say about somebody. And he's always got an example of how he's worked with every single one of us on the committee.
For Johnny, it was a team effort. And that's the way I think Johnny works in every step of the way as a United States Senator.
There was one piece of legislation that had one no vote. Everything else ended up being unanimous. It has made a huge difference.
So I think when we look at Johnny's tenure at the Veterans Committee and for veterans, it's that he brought real solutions to problems that affected veterans day in and day out. And his legacy will be he leaves this institution having made a contribution to people he'll never have an opportunity to meet that were benefited by something Johnny Isakson did.
He guided more than 25 bills into law on behalf of those who've served our country.
He led a delegation to Normandy recently for the 75th anniversary, and it was just a fabulous trip to honor what our men and women, our soldiers did in World War II, storming the beaches at Normandy. And it epitomized Johnny's service, how much he cares about our veterans, how much he cares about our military, how much he cares about our country.
I think he'll be remembered, again, for serving our country. And on this committee, serving those veterans who served our country. And passing significant legislation which reformed, which advanced the mission of the VA.
On behalf of the thousands, and I do mean thousands, of constituents we have assisted here in Georgia, and those you have impacted across the country, thank you. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the more than 18 million veterans and their families this Veterans Day, we celebrate his leadership. Johnny Isakson, thank you for your service. Senators eventually come and go. I do not think we will see the likeness of Senator Johnny Isakson for years to come. Semper Fi, my friend. I love you. We love you.
He was running Northside Realty. I was involved in a small mortgage operation, and I met him one day and I thought he was, the biggest business guy in Georgia. He probably was at that time.
My father had been very successful in real estate, and I knew if I didn't try real estate, and every Thanksgiving he'd be in there telling me on Thanksgiving Day, if you had gone into real estate, you'd be doing a lot better than you're doing now. So I said, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and go into real estate, and I'll be a failure, and he'll never be able to say I didn't try. And knocked on doors, did all the things nobody likes to do, but learned to accept rejection and go on to the next customer and the next client. And it was a great lesson, so it was a great training ground for politics too, because in real estate, you're causing a buyer and a seller to agree to a price on a house or a piece of land or something like that and make a transaction and make a deal. And politics the same way.
Johnny Isakson, as CEO, worked 7 days a week trying to sell real estate, trying to support his real estate agents.
The 2 decades he spent turning a local real estate business into a nationally recognized leader.
But I remember Johnny was always the best listener I was around. He looked at your eye and he wanted to know what you had to say.
There's a reason he was a successful realtor. He is great at relationships. He is great at helping people feel comfortable, and he is great at helping people feel remembered.
He wanted us to treat each other, and he wanted us to treat the constituents as if they were customers, and that they were the most important people in the world, and he treated us that way, and I think that created cohesiveness within Team Isakson.
The business community know they have a tireless champion in Johnny, and they know that because he's always here.
Let's take those things that are tried and true, not things we think will work, but things we know will work. Let's make them the gold standard.
As a former businessman, he knows how important it is that we have budgets that work not just for the government, but for everybody who's working with the federal government. And so we said, this is an opportunity for us to show some real bipartisanship. So I think it was really important both to raise awareness of how we could fix the budget issues in Washington, but also to send a strong message about how important it is that we work together.
So his background from the real estate business, I think, brings that business perspective, and it's just common sense that we ought to use a 2-year budget cycle.
Failure should not be an option for us in this case, and it's time we started finding common ground.
It's our responsibility. The American people are counting on us.
His business acumen, combined with his knowledge of how to get things done in this environment, has been absolutely vital.
He has shown how to bring business principles to the legislative process, to the Senate.
When major corporations and small businesses are in trouble and they need somebody who understands the real details of business, they come to Johnny Isakson. And in the early 2000s, the airline industry was struggling all across the country. Major airlines were facing bankruptcy, and that included Delta Airlines, hometown Atlanta, Georgia. When Delta Airlines was facing bankruptcy, one of the major problems with bankruptcy would be the fact that they would get rid of the pension and destroy the retirement for over 30,000 employees.
If you'd ever told me in my teenage and early life that I'd have gotten Ted Kennedy to help me sign a bill that would save Delta Airlines and save the country's airline system, I'd say you're crazy.
It was controversial in that there were Republicans and Democrats that supported it, and there were Republicans and Democrats that opposed it very vigorously.
Delta's a great airline, the biggest employer in my state. If we add this amendment I put in that passed the Senate, Delta was able to take the structured bankruptcy rather than a straight bankruptcy. Straight bankruptcy would have wiped them out. When I looked up and saw the eyes of those flight attendants, when that vote was posted, they realized that we had passed that amendment and realized that was going to give them a chance to get the pension they worked for all their lives. I've never had a better feeling in all my lives.
The Wall Street Journal called Johnny Isakson the senator from Delta. He wears that as a badge of honor because he got in and fought for his hometown airlines in a way that not only saved the pension for those employees, but essentially made Atlanta the hub for the greatest airline in the world today.
Georgia's fortunate. We have 2 huge assets that make the difference in our state and any other state in the Union. Hartsfield International Airport, which is the busiest airport in the world, 1 million passengers going through there all the time. And the Port of Savannah. The Port of Savannah is the most profitable bulk port on the east coast of the United States of America. Everybody that get elected to the Senate from Georgia, got elected to the House from Georgia, or whatever, they all had, that was the first question they'd be asked, especially if they went to Savannah. We'd gotten so close for so long, but we'd always push it off a little bit further, so we're going to get it next year.
I can't overstate, number one, the impact of the port to our economy. There are in excess of 350,000 jobs in Georgia that are generated as a result of the activity going on at the port in Savannah and the port in Brunswick.
And it's not something that you just pass a bill 1 year and then you wash your hands and say, I'm all done. That could be frustrating to somebody who just wants to, be a decisive CEO type and just say, well, I passed it, let's move on. That's just not how Congress works. And so Johnny has been very successful in realizing how political change happens in Congress and in the legislative body.
He fought for that when he was in the House, in the Senate. He's been doing this for 20 years. I'm new to the fight, but I was on that Port Authority. I knew what kind of return investment it had. It was over 7 to 1. And Johnny's been tireless about that, as he has about so many things in the state. Laid the groundwork for that and really drove that tirelessly until we finally got approval for the funding that we'll get that thing done now.
I got elected in 1998. It's now 2019, so it's 21 years later. We got authorized, funded, approved, and it's in construction now, the last phase.
Johnny Isakson's 40-year career as the president of the Chamber of Commerce, as a U.S. House member, as the U.S. Senator who focused on infrastructure, whether it was highways or the Port of Savannah, whether it was cybersecurity or the infrastructure of the 21st century. And Georgia's the first state to bring back nuclear power in the modern age. Johnny Isakson has been there fighting for the very fundamental aspects of the economy that we had to have to make Georgia attractive to grow a business and to bring a new business from somewhere else.
When you think big and you do big, you got to work big. And we had a lot of big obstacles to overcome.
He's able to carry a lot of water. I mean, he carries a lot of water and gets a lot of things accomplished, and then does it in his way, the right way.
Johnny has the capacity of getting a result because people trust him and because he's a very skillful legislator.
You are an unmatched salesman, whether selling homes or ideas or legislation.
In a few years, Georgia will have the most available electric energy of any state in the United States of America. Best place to manufacture, best place to build, best place to live. It's a great way to end a long journey over 20 years. You know, everybody says, what's your hobby? I said, well, my kids and my grandkids. I said, that's not a good hobby. I said, well, that's my hobby. Our children are a message you and I will send to a time we'll never see. I'm 75. I'm on the last 9 in the clubhouse in sight. They're at the peak of their age, et cetera, but it's a cycle. And you just got to recognize that. You got to continue to invest in that cycle and improve it and make it better.
I met Johnny early on in the fall of 1962. Our personalities kind of meshed and we became good friends, and here we are now all these years later, and we're even better friends. But we palled around a lot during our University of Georgia days. We wound up marrying by Muse. Diane and Julianne were good friends, and we've all stayed close through the years. Johnny has a long political history. He has a long successful business history. But he also has a history of being known as being a compassionate person.
He was a Sunday school teacher for over 30 years. So here's a man who not only has a biblical worldview, but also knows the Bible pretty thoroughly. He has a tremendous amount of contentment, as I have learned to have as well, in the fact that God's got this.
You know, a lot of people think that we're always Republican and Democrat. Johnny always came to prayer breakfast with us. He'd sit in the same spot, and he was always one of the gentlemen who would be there and had an interesting message, cared about other people, wanted to know what everybody else was doing, and he wanted to know what he could do to help you.
He has been just a great friend to all of us. For those of us who've had privilege to attend prayer breakfast with him, know what a really remarkable man of faith that he is. We know what an ethical leader he has been.
It goes without saying that Johnny Isakson is hands down the nicest person to ever serve the United States Senate, nicest person to ever walk the halls of Congress.
Gentleman, patriot, soft-spoken, no pretension, and just dedicated to making sure that his neighbors feel good.
My mother deserves, she was the sweetest lady in the world. My dad did so many things in volunteer time. But my parents just kind of ingrained in me by the way they lived their life how important it was to give to your community, give to your family, and be involved and be nice to people.
Johnny's reputation for being a good guy extends not just to his colleagues in the Senate, but to everybody on the Hill, and it starts with his staff. He was able to hire good people because he was good to his staff. He was courteous to his staff.
First day I got here, I'll never forget walking in and his door is open on both sides. And I was so confused as staff were walking through, and you know, that's his style. You know, you guys told me, no, he wants it open, he wants to see staff, he wants to talk.
He really lives the motto of friends and future friends. There's no enemy to Johnny Isakson.
The world is all about friends and future friends.
There's friends and future friends.
You always have friends and future friends. You don't have enemies.
There's only friends and future friends.
Friends and future friends.
Friends and future friends.
There are no strangers. There are only friends and future friends.
When I sold real estate, and if a guy told me, no, I'm not going to buy that property, I won't buy the one from Fred down the street, I wouldn't get mad and cuss him out. I'd say, well, next time you're looking for a house, call me again, I'll do a better job. Humiliate yourself a little bit, be humble.
I had never met him before, and I went, and confession's good for the soul, so I went ahead and said, look, I want you to know I supported your opponent. I supported Matt Collins. And his response was, you know, he's one of the nicest guys. And I said, no, I'm talking about the one who ran against you. Oh, that's who I'm talking about. He said, he was just a really nice guy who had a great campaign, and we're very good friends. He has an innate humility that is so natural.
Well, to use a line from Abe Lincoln, you can appeal to people's better angels, or you can do something else. Johnny Isakson has always appealed to our better angels.
The oldest saying here is, if you want a friend in Washington, go get a dog, which is a way of saying no one is a real friend. Johnny Isakson has been a real friend.
Johnny doesn't think just because he's got senator in front of his name that he needs to get anything special. Johnny's the guy that says, just because I got senator in my name, I got work to do, and he rolls up his sleeves and he gets it done.
I think if there were a Mr. Congeniality in the United States Senate, he would win it hands down, no question about it.
There are very few members of the Senate that I feel are as selfless and as smaller egos than Johnny Isakson.
The nasty part of Washington, D.C. never washed off on that fine man, I can tell you.
There is no doubt about it. A lot of people around this place are political. They'll say something to you to just kind of get you out of the way or to fight or attack you. Johnny never did that. When he said, I'm going to get this done, you could believe him and you know it would get done.
Even when you disagree with him, he has an ability to make you feel like he's not only listening, but caring about what you think. And that is what always struck me about Johnny Isakson. He listened.
Johnny was outspoken for somebody who didn't have a voice at the table.
So there's this kind of nice mix of very congenial, man of integrity, steel of spine. And you put those together and you have a leader.
And he will always be remembered for honesty and integrity and setting an example of intellectual honesty for the younger generation of people who are going to be our leaders tomorrow.
I didn't do anything I did to be remembered for it. The things I did that were memorable had to be things I did because I wanted to try and solve a problem, and it turned out to be memorable because I did. So it's about relationships, it's about respect, it's about motivation, and it's about getting things done. And so make friends and be a friend, know how to be a friend, and it just makes all the difference in the world. It has for me, and that's how I've gotten elected, that's how I've been successful. And it's not about me, it's about them. It's about us. And that's the way I've always felt it.
If you're willing to continue to learn throughout your life, if you're willing to respect your fellow man and treat everybody with ethics and principle, if you're willing to love those who've gotten you to where you are and are going to take you to where you're going to be, if you find a deep and abiding faith that gets you through the difficult times, and if you're willing to dream, you can do anything in America that you want to do. This is a stadium full of parents. You are their dream, and they love you very much. Thank you.
He's going to have a legacy, obviously, in the field of education, where he has been a tremendous leader.
He has a way of getting along with people. For example, the Democratic governor, Zell Miller of Georgia, appointed Johnny to head the State Board of Education in Georgia, even though Johnny was a Republican. So he has a capacity to cause other people to like him, to trust him, and as a result, he gets things done.
Well, I was running for governor in 1990, and Zell Miller was the Democratic candidate for governor. And truth of the matter is, we ran a good race and did well, but we finished second. And I was in my office on a Friday morning, and the phone rang, and he said, Johnny, I said, yes. This is Zell Miller. I said, hey, Governor, how you doing? I wonder what the heck he called me about. He said, I got a problem, and I want you to fix it. I said, well, what's that? He said, well, I'm fired the Board of Education tonight, and I'm going to ask them to elect you the chairman. I'm going to ask you to come down here and do whatever you think we need to do to fix this thing up. I can't deal with it anymore. So here in one day's time, I had gone from not even knowing where the Board of Education was to being asked to be the chairman, being asked to tell the governor of the state, who I'd lost to for governor, who to appoint in his cabinet for the Department of Education.
He gets a call from his former opponent and bitter political rival, Governor Zell Miller, who says to him, Johnny, I'd like for you to come and help rescue the State Board of Education from a moment of crisis. He had turned somebody who had been a political enemy into a political ally, and it was that political new friend who reached across the aisle and gave Johnny Isakson an opportunity to serve the public once again.
And Georgia turned around. Scores got better, schools got better, people got better. We passed bond issues, things like that. That appointment changed my whole political career because a couple years later, Newt Gingrich resigned, and they came to me and said, would you run to replace him? And I won the seat. And then a few years later, Zell Miller, who had beat me for governor and then asked me to come run the State Department, called me up and said, I'm going to resign from the Senate. I want you to come down and take my seat. So my whole life changed over 45 years in elected office, from day one when I ran in 1974 to today. I went from everybody that I lost to, appointed me where I won a race to replace them. Just because somebody's your opponent today doesn't mean they can't be your biggest friend tomorrow. That was my most fun I've ever had in public life, was the education experience in Georgia and how it came about.
Johnny was one of the few Republicans who had ever served as the chairman of a state school board and understood public education policy at the level that Johnny Isakson did. Johnny's wife, Diane, had been a very successful public school teacher. Johnny had served on the education committees in the State House and the State Senate, and then chairman of the State Board of Education. No Republican in the Congress knew more about public education than Johnny Isakson.
Well, Senator Patty Murray and I work on a lot of things together. For example, on education, fixing No Child Left Behind. We got stuck actually on an early childhood education issue that she wanted and that I couldn't support. And so I just stepped back and asked Johnny to work with Patty to see if they could work it out. And they did, because of their respect and trust for each other.
Every time we sat in the committee hearing room or closed door meetings behind the scenes, everyone just listened to what he had to say, because he was one of the few people who was actually a part of the original conversation too. So, I'd write memos for him saying this, and then he'd bring up things that happened in, '86 in the State House, or when he was the chair of the Georgia Board of Education.
I tried to go out and be a catalyst for people to say, rather than say, tell me what do you think is wrong with education, tell me what you think is right with it, but tell me what we should do, and then if you think that's what we should do, how can we help you do it?
I was delighted because Johnny's just the kind of person who focuses on something. I knew his passion about early childhood education, and he agreed immediately to work with me. And we were able to put together for the first time ever, as part of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, a focus on early childhood education.
I think it's fair to say that we could not have fixed No Child Left Behind without Johnny Isakson's experience and leadership, and I'm deeply grateful to him for that.
I am so grateful to him for his passion on that, his work on that, and the ability to say, we got that done.
Seeing this bill through in the committee is a great testimony to working together, to finding common ground, and to our collective purpose of seeing to it our children are the best educated children in the world. So Senator Alexander, thank you. Senator Murray, thank you for what you've done.
Today you graduate from an institution full of classrooms bordered by walls, time clocks, and schedules, into the bigger classroom known as the world around you. If this ceremony was the end of your education, it wouldn't be called commencement, it'd be called terminal. But it's called commencement because all of us in life know that your education in college is something that you build on for your entire career. So never stop learning.
My step-grandson, Charlie, died 4 years ago of an overdose laced with fentanyl. My son called me, his stepfather called me at about 11 o'clock one night up here in my apartment. He was crying. He said, Dad, Charlie's dead. And we knew Charlie had a problem. We had spent a lot of money on Charlie to get him rehabilitated, and for 3 or 4 years he had been on track. In fact, he was going to graduate the next day. Awareness is critical. Looking the other way is a disaster. And focusing in your family always on making sure your kids can talk to you.
I also want to thank you for sharing in public the experience of your family in the loss of your grandson to an opioid overdose. You should know what a difference your public discussion of that tragedy made and continues to make as we deal with erasing the stigma that comes with addiction.
We had senators like Johnny Isakson and Patty Murray and Republicans and Democrats working to pass what I call the Opioid Response Act. And President Trump said it was the single most important piece of legislation in response to a human epidemic that the country had ever done. And Johnny Isakson had a major role in it.
I just don't want to ever see anybody die, waste of life, all over an illegal narcotic drug that somebody makes a little hit on one night to get high. It's just not right.
The kind of health challenges that Johnny's had over the last couple of years, you could completely understand if he would get down or be on a day where he might not want to deal with folks. That's not Johnny Isakson.
And he saw the Parkinson's as an opportunity to demonstrate the dignity and the equanimity of temperament that can be there even for someone who is having some difficult challenges. And I think he's just been marvelous, a marvelous example of what I would call a profile in courage.
I've got chronic conditions, I've got Parkinson's. Discovery and solving medical problems is not easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it. It's not easy at all. It's also very expensive, and pretty much the major companies who have the money decide where to invest money in research to try and find the next drug that's going to solve somebody's problem, and that's great. But we shouldn't leave out of the field for study people who need help as well, but they just might be as rich.
Children's Hospital graduate medical education issue was one where we came together because a good program was being threatened. Johnny figured out a way to extend the program and to keep it going. And because of Johnny Isakson, there will be cures for rare pediatric diseases that he will see and frankly a lot of others that we will never see. They will happen long after we're gone.
He's reached across the aisle because this is not a partisan issue in any respect, to make sure that the healthcare system, which from a veteran standpoint has been just in a state of collapse, but the delivery of healthcare to those folks is better today than it ever has been, and I attribute that to Johnny Isakson.
When you look at what President Bush and a lot of interesting people did with AIDS, it's the greatest story of all about America. President Bush deserves a lot of credit. President Obama, I worked with President Obama on expanding PEPFAR, with the President's Emergency Program for the Eradication of AIDS, which is what that stands for. And America's a beacon of light around the world for that.
Johnny Isakson not only cares, but he gives a damn about those who don't have power.
We were able to work together on the children's health care issue, the STAR Act. I'm pleased we worked together with giving CDC, the Center for Disease Control, more initiatives and more resources to do a very important, difficult job.
We spent a lot of time at the CDC, and an issue with the CDC not being in Washington but being a government entity is they can sometimes feel like they are neglected or aren't at the front of minds of Washington legislators, but they had a champion in Johnny.
Of course, CDC is in everybody's backyard. It's America's health center. There's only one CDC in the world, and it's in Atlanta, Georgia.
I've so enjoyed our time as co-chairs of the Senate Cancer Coalition, working to improve research and treatment for millions of Americans.
He and Senator Casey years ago had established the Creating Hope Act. It basically allows for rare pediatric therapies to get through FDA with expedited approval, which is something that families across the country are desperately in need of.
And I want to take a moment to just step back and thank Senator Isakson too, for his name is on most of these bipartisan bills, for all of your work over the years to work with people to find common goals and to find solutions. It's truly been an honor to work with you, and as you end your days here in the Senate, I know we will all remember the legacy that you have brought to all of us on how we can listen to each other and find solutions and work our way forward. So thank you.
Gentleman from Georgia, please raise his right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, so help you God?
I do, Mr. Speaker.
Congratulations, you're now a member of the 106th Congress.
I hope in the years to come
I'll be a respected friend and one who joined with you to make a difference for the United States of America. Thank you very much.
I was in Rome, Georgia, speaking at Berry College, and I got a call from the leadership in the Senate, Republican leadership, saying, we're assigning committees, and we noticed you have never been on foreign relations before, and we can't get anybody to take the last post on foreign relations. Would you take it? So the next thing I knew, Mitch McConnell called me up and said, I got to have somebody be chair of the Africa subcommittee, and nobody will take it. I said, well, I'll take it, but I've never been to Africa. He said, well, go. So the next week I went to Africa, and I fell in love with Africa. And it's beautiful. The people are wonderful. They're genuinely good people, and it's fun to be a catalyst, like America has been, for good things that happen that you show off to the rest of the world.
The United States has played a significant role in Africa, and it's important for us to understand the issues that affect us and what we can do to help. When America goes, we invest in the human capital with PEPFAR to reduce the rate of AIDS.
You never win by not competing. I've always felt like we ought to be at the table and be a player and be playing for the right reasons.
Fighting hunger is a tremendous asset in bringing about security and independence and a good life for people around the world who don't have it. In the future, Africa will be our greatest trading partner if we handle it right.
In fact, I like to bring people together, and when you bring people together to find common ground, it's amazing the results that you can produce.
One of the secrets to Johnny Isakson is that he'll share credit with anybody in order to get something important done.
The people of the world will solve the world, but they're going to need leaders of the world to show them the way. And the United States has been a leader for 2.5 centuries, and will continue to be, I'm sure. And in the end, it'll be the people in all the countries that join together with us, working for peace and prosperity for all countries.
Your example, your leadership, has made the world safer, has made a difference in the lives of many. So on behalf of the USGLC, I have the great opportunity to present to you our Lifetime Achievement Award for truly a lifetime of achievement. Thank you, and God bless.